Down in a cave, time doesn't feel like time anymore. Your headlamp is the only daylight you get. And if that light starts guiding something you can't see, you won't know it until it's too late. Tonight's stories aren't campfire fiction. They're 100% true, pieced together and verified through public records, official reports, and witness accounts. Some names and small details have been changed to protect privacy, but what happened is completely real. Before we go on, hit like. It helps this story reach more horror lovers like you. Comment where you're watching from. You're part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family's watching from. And when you're done, comment which story hit you the hardest. Finally, subscribe. Your subscribe helps fuel this channel so I can bring you even more terrifying true stories. I wasn't supposed to be in the Appalachian Mountains that fall. I told myself I was done with caves after my cousin Eli got pulled out of one in Carter County. Alive, technically, but hollowed out in a way the doctors couldn't name. He'd stare at walls like he was waiting for them to move. He wouldn't sleep with lights off. He never said what happened in there. He just kept repeating, soft as breath, I lost an hour, but I needed the money. And I needed something else too. Something I didn't admit out loud. I wanted to prove to myself that caves were just rock and water and bad decisions. Nothing more. So when a guy named Royce called me about a paid mapping job near a place locals called Dry Creek Hollow, an unmarked system that opened under an old logging road outside the town of White Top, I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. There were 4 of us. Royce, who'd done volunteer rescue and carried himself like someone used to being listened to. Marcy, quiet and meticulous, with a notebook in a waterproof bag and a habit of touching the cave wall like she was reading it. Hank, older than the rest of us, always clearing his throat, always checking his gear twice. And me, Caleb, 31, divorced, broke, and pretending I was fine. We met at dawn in the gravel lot behind an abandoned general store that had turned gray with time. Fog sat low in the valley, thick enough to hide the bottoms of the hills. The mountains rose like dark backs around us, damp and patient. Everything smelled like wet leaves and diesel and old rot. Royce drove us up a narrow forest road in a mud-streaked truck, past sagging fences and a couple of cabins that looked like they'd been waiting to fall for years. There were no people, just the occasional dog bark far off and the constant drip of water from branches. The kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, more like the woods were holding its breath. The entrance wasn't dramatic. A sinkhole in a tangle of rhododendron, half hidden by moss and dead ferns. Someone had laid old boards across it years ago, maybe to keep a mule from stepping in. The boards were warped and soft. Hank tested them with a boot, and they flexed like wet cardboard. Royce set up a small folding table on a flat rock and pulled out a logbook in a plastic sleeve. Standard practice: name, time in, time out, location. He wrote first, Marcy signed. Hank grumbled and signed. I wrote Caleb J. and the time, 8:12 a.m., and stared at my own handwriting like it belonged to someone else. We clipped our helmets, checked our lamps, and clipped radios to our straps. The radios were cheap handhelds, the kind that crackled even in open air, but Royce insisted on them. For line of sight, for morale, for whatever, he said, not joking. Inside, the temperature dropped fast. The smell changed too. Earthy, mineral, damp stone. The sound of the outside world thinned to nothing. Our lights made the walls glisten. Water dripped somewhere with slow regularity, like a clock nobody asked for. We moved carefully, marking turns with survey tape, measuring distance with a reel, jotting notes. The passage dipped and widened and narrowed again. The ceiling sometimes low enough that my helmet scraped. Mud sucked at our boots. Every so often, the cave opened into a belly of blackness, our headlamps barely touching the far side. About 3 hours in, at least by Royce's watch, Marcy stopped and held up a hand. "Radio's picking something up," she said. Her voice was small in the darkness. At first, I heard only static, then, threaded through it, a sound that made the hair on my arms lift. Breathing, not speech, not a cough. Just a slow, wet inhale and an exhale with a faint rasp, like someone trying not to be heard. Royce clicked his radio. "That you, Hank?" Hank's reply came quick. "No." Royce looked at me. I shook my head. My throat felt tight, like I'd swallowed dust. "It's interference," Royce said, but his eyes were fixed on the darkness beyond our light. "Old wires, mineral deposits. Happens." Marcy didn't argue. She just listened, face pale under the helmet strap. The breathing continued, steady as a person, trying to calm themselves down. We kept moving, because that's what you do underground. Momentum is safety. But the sound didn't stop. It rose and fell in our radios like the cave itself was alive. Then I noticed something that made it worse. Whenever I turned my head, the breathing changed. Not in volume, its timing. If I swept my headlamp beam across the wall, the inhale would begin like it was following the movement. If I held still, it held still too, lingering in a long pause before the next breath. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, my brain pattern matching, like it always did when it was scared. But when Marcy lifted her light towards the ceiling, the radio hissed and the breathing pulled in. Fast, shallow, excited. Royce stopped us in a narrow corridor where the rock pressed close. The walls were scratched in places, old gouges like someone had dragged metal through soft stone. "Everybody turn your lights off for 10 seconds, he said. Hank didn't like it. "That's stupid." 10 seconds, Royce repeated, low and firm. We did it. The darkness hit like a weight. The cave swallowed everything, no up, no down, just the wet smell of stone and our own bodies. In my radio, the breathing stopped, not faded, stopped like a switch. 10 seconds later, Royce clicked his light back on. We followed, beams snapping into existence. The breathing returned immediately, right on cue, like it had been waiting. Nobody said anything for a while. The only sounds were water, and our boots in mud, and that steady, patient breath coming through plastic speakers. We kept going, because turning back felt like admitting something we didn't have a name for. The cave twisted into tighter spaces, and the air felt heavier. In one small alcove, my light caught something that didn't belong. A square of paper stuck under a rock, edges swollen from damp. I pulled it free with gloved fingers. It was a photograph, black and white, curled and spotted. 4 people in helmets, smiling at a cave entrance. Their headlamps were old-fashioned, big and round. In the background, a folding table, a logbook, a timestamp stamped into the corner. October 14th, 1989. My stomach tightened. The man on the far left had a face like Hank's. Same heavy brow, same tired eyes. "Hank," I said, voice thin, "you ever been here before?" He stared at the photo without taking it. "No." But he didn't sound sure. Royce told me to put it back. We didn't argue. We just moved on. dragging our dread along like extra gear. An hour later, maybe less. Underground time is slippery. We reached a point where the passage dipped into a low crawl space full of water. Royce decided that was our turnaround. "We got enough," he said, but he wouldn't look at any of us when he said it. As we headed back, the breathing continued, sinking with every sweep of our lamps. It felt less like interference and more like something paying attention. When we finally saw the pale oval of daylight, it should have been a relief. It wasn't. Outside, the fog had thickened. The trees stood in wet silence. The air smelled like rain and old wood smoke. Royce led us to the table and opened the logbook, his brow furrowed. "What the hell?" he whispered. He turned it toward us. Our entry times, 8:12 a.m., 8:13, 8:14, had been crossed out with a hard, deliberate line. Next to each name was a new time, written in fresh ink, darker than Royce's. And under timeout, all 4 of our names had times already filled in. 10:26 a.m. An hour earlier than the time on Royce's watch. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. The radio on my strap crackled softly, and for just a second, just long enough to make my mouth go dry, I heard breathing again, even though we were standing in open air. Then it stopped, and the fog swallowed the road like it had never been there. Nobody wanted to be the first one to say it out loud. Roy shut the logbook like it could bite him. He checked his pen, like maybe he'd somehow done it without remembering. His hand trembled when he tried to slide the logbook back into its sleeve. Marcy stood with her arms folded tight, eyes fixed on the trees. Hank kept looking at the photograph I'd found, now tucked into my pocket like a hot coal. He didn't ask for it, but I could tell he was thinking about it. "Could be kids," Royce said finally, "or locals messing around." But we were miles from any house. The road up was a washout mess, and the ink looked fresh, too fresh. Whoever wrote those times had done it while we were underground. I tried to swallow, and my throat clicked. Why would anyone write us out an hour early? Royce didn't answer. We packed up fast, not frantic, but hurried in that controlled way people get when they're trying not to panic. The woods didn't feel the same anymore. Every little sound, a twig snapping, a crow far off, felt like a message I couldn't translate. The truck started on the second try. Royce drove too fast down the logging road, tires throwing mud. Fog pressed against the windshield, thick and white, and the wipers smeared it around like milk. The hollows we passed were empty except for rotting porch furniture and rusting cars with weeds growing through the frames. No one spoke much. The radios were clipped to our straps, turned down, but still on. I kept expecting that breathing to come back. My hands were cold, even in the cab's stale heat. When we reached the general store lot, Royce told us to keep quiet about the logbook. "We report the cave to the county and leave the rest out," he said. "No point stirring up whatever." Hank laughed once, dry and humorless. "Stirring up what?" Royce's jaw worked. He didn't respond. We split ways, but the day stuck to me. I drove east toward my rental outside Damascus. The mountains closing in on both sides. The fog followed me like a slow animal. On the radio, my car radio, not the handheld, I kept hearing a faint hiss under the music, like static. Every time I adjusted the volume, it didn't go away. That night it rained hard, the kind that turns the world into a steady whisper. My place was a small one-bedroom with thin walls and carpet that always smelled faintly of damp. I tried to eat, but the food tasted like metal. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that corridor, walls scraped and close, my light sweeping, and that breathing matching me like a shadow. Around 2 a.m., I got up and pulled the photo from my pocket. Under the kitchen light, it looked worse. Water damage, speckled fungus. The faces were clearer though. There were 4 of them, like us. Same kind of folding table, same kind of logbook. I turned it over. On the back, written in pencil so faint, it almost disappeared into the paper. Dry Creek Survey. Don't go back for the hour. I stared at that sentence until my eyes watered. The next morning, I called Royce. He didn't pick up. I texted. No response. I called Marcy. She answered on the 3rd ring, sounding like she'd been awake all night. I found something, I said. Silence on her end then. Don't say it. I think someone's been down there before. I continued anyway, because I couldn't stop. I found a photo. The back says, I know what it says, she cut in, voice tight. Because I found a notebook page stuffed in a crack near the crawl space. I didn't tell anyone. My stomach dipped. What did it say? She exhaled slowly, and I heard something in the background. Water running, maybe a faucet left on too long. It was a list, she said. Times, names. Then a line that said, if you hear it, don't look for it. If it follows your light, don't test it. My skin prickled. Why didn't you tell Royce? I tried, she whispered. He won't answer me either. That afternoon, I drove back toward Dry Creek Hollow alone. I told myself I just wanted to see the logbook again, to confirm it hadn't been some shared hallucination, to take a picture and show someone rational, to prove the mountains weren't playing tricks on me. It was a stupid decision, I know that now. But trauma makes you chase answers like a thirst. The logging road looked worse after the rain. Ruts filled with brown water. Branches sagged low, dripping. Halfway up, I saw a new set of tire tracks in the mud. Fresh, deep, like a truck had gone through that morning. At the entrance, the folding table was still there, but the logbook was gone. Only the plastic sleeve remained, torn open and tossed in the mud. The boards across the sinkhole had been moved aside, stacked neatly like someone had taken time. I stood there for a long minute listening. Nothing but rain on leaves and the distant hollow call of a bird. I should have left right then. Instead, I crouched and shined my flashlight into the hole. Cold air breathed up from it, smelling of stone and stagnant water. My beam caught the first few feet of passage, the slick rock, the mud. And then, farther in, right at the edge where the darkness became total, I saw a strip of survey tape. Not ours. Older, yellowed, printed with faded block letters that I could just barely read. Dry Creek Rescue Training, 1989. My mouth went dry. My light trembled. I forced myself to step back from the hole. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. You left at 10:26. Don't take the hour back out. I stood in the rain, staring at the message until the screen dimmed. Then my handheld radio, still clipped to my strap, turned off, crackled. A soft hiss, and under it, for just a moment, breathing. Slow, wet, familiar. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just stood there, like my body had forgotten how to react. Because the sound didn't come from the hole. It came from behind me, somewhere in the wet woods, where the fog hung low between the trees. I turned my light toward it without thinking. The breathing stopped instantly. The woods looked empty. Just trunks, slick bark, dripping branches. But my beam caught something else. A reflective glint, low to the ground, like a lens or a piece of plastic. Like a headlamp. I backed away, step by step, never lowering the light, because I was suddenly sure of one thing. Whatever was out there didn't want me to see it, but it wanted to know where I was looking. I got back in my car and drove until the road hit pavement, until I saw other people, until the fog thinned and the world felt normal again. But normal didn't stick. In the weeks after, I started noticing gaps, small ones at first, walking into a room and forgetting why, losing track of a conversation halfway through. Then bigger ones. I'd look at my phone and see messages I didn't remember sending. I'd find mud on my shoes when I hadn't left the apartment. Once, I woke up with my flashlight on the bedside table, turned on, beam pointed at the wall, like I'd been using it to keep something in place. I never heard from Royce again. Marcy moved out of state without saying goodbye. Hank died 2 months later. Heart attack, according to the obit. I went to the funeral out of obligation and guilt. In the photo board by the casket, there was an old black and white picture of him as a younger man in a helmet, smiling at a cave entrance. The same photo I'd held in my hands. Except in this one, there were 5 people. One of them, on the far right, was turned slightly away from the camera. You couldn't see their face, but you could see the headlamp, and you could see the way their hand was resting on the logbook, pen poised, like they were waiting to write something down. I still think about that line on the back. Don't go back for the hour. I don't know what it means in any clean, explainable way. I only know that sometimes, usually when it's foggy and the rain is steady and the mountains feel too close, I'll glance at the clock and realize I can't account for 60 minutes of my day. And in the quiet afterward, if I move my flashlight beam across the room, I swear I can hear something, barely there, matching me, not haunting me, just paying attention. I took the job because it was off the books and close enough to drive home if it went bad. That's what I told myself anyway. The truth is, I'd been restless since the accident. Since the night I slid my truck into a ditch outside Shady Valley and sat there for an hour with the engine ticking and the smell of antifreeze in the cold air, not calling anyone. Not because I was hurt, because I didn't want anyone to find me. I'd been like that ever since, doing things that put me alone in places where nobody asked questions. Royce, different Royce than the stories you hear online. Just a local guide who ran tourists through safe caverns in summer, messaged me through a friend. He needed a second body for a short, careful look at an old limestone system near the Tennessee-Virginia line, up behind the folds of the Appalachian Mountains, where the fog sits in the hollows until midday. He said it wasn't for tourists. He said it was for a landowner who wanted to make sure kids weren't getting in. I didn't ask why a landowner would pay cash for that. I just told him what days I was free. We met in the lot of an old feed store on the edge of a town called Saltville, where the storefronts looked tired and the gutters overflowed from last night's rain. The sky was low and colorless. Mist hung over the road like breath. Royce's truck smelled like wet dog and old coffee. He had a wiry build and a soft voice, the kind of man who saves his words for when they matter. His gear was clean, organized. Mine looked like it had been thrown together, because it had. We drove out on a back road that turned to gravel, then to mud. The mountains closed in tighter, trees pressing close, bare branches clawing at grey light. We passed a sagging cabin with plastic over broken windows and a porch that had caved in on one side. A rusted swing hung motionless, chains creaking faintly even though there was no wind. Royce didn't comment. He just kept driving, eyes forward. The entrance was hidden behind rhododendron and slick rocks, a slit in the ground where water disappeared. A rusted wire fence leaned nearby like someone had once tried to keep livestock away, then given up. Everything smelled like damp leaves and rotten wood. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a crow called once and went quiet. Royce knelt and pulled a flat stone away. Under it was a metal ring set into concrete. An old seal point, like a hatch cover, used to sit there. The concrete was cracked now, the ring bent. "This is it," he said, and that was the only announcement. We suited up. Helmet, light, gloves, knee pads. He handed me a small waterproof map case with a printed survey inside. Lines and chambers, measured and labeled, like someone had tried to make sense of the underground. "Stay close," Royce said. "If I stop, you stop." Inside, the cave swallowed the world fast. The temperature dropped and the air got thick with wet mineral smell. Water dripped constantly, not loud, but steady enough that it started to feel like time passing. We followed a low passage that forced us into crouches, then into a crawl. Mud smeared my elbows and knees. Every time I breathed, my exhale fogged in my headlamp beam. The stone was slick and cold under my gloves, and the sound of our movement, fabric against rock, water sloshing, seemed louder than it should have been. The first unsettling thing wasn't dramatic. It was small. A piece of nylon cord tied neatly around a rock nub at shoulder height. Not old, not brittle. Bright enough that my light caught it like a warning. Royce stared at it for a second too long, then kept moving without touching it. A few minutes later, I noticed another. A broken glow stick lodged in a crack. Its plastic cloudy. Its color faded, but still faintly visible. It made my stomach tighten. People didn't leave glow sticks in caves unless they'd gotten nervous. We reached a section where the cave dipped and water pooled deeper. The limestone tunnel narrowed and the ceiling dropped until there was no choice but to belly crawl through cold brown water. It soaked through my sleeves immediately. The water smelled like iron and old soil. Royce went first, slow and practiced. I followed, trying not to think about how little space there was between my back and the rock above me. My headlamp beam bounced off ripples. Shadows moved along the walls in the corner of my eye, but every time I looked directly, it was just stone. We'd been moving like that for a while, no talking, just crawling. When Royce froze so suddenly I bumped his boot. He didn't turn around. He didn't lift his head. He just raised a hand in front of him, palm down. The universal sign to stop. The water pressed cold against my ribs. My heart thudded in my throat. Royce's voice came through the narrow space, barely above a whisper. "This isn't on the map." I craned my neck enough to see what he meant. Ahead, the tunnel curved left into a darker throat. On the printed survey, the passage should have continued straight another 20 feet into a wider chamber. But the straight path in front of us had partially collapsed. Stones piled like someone had poured them there. The only way forward was the curve. Royce pulled the map case closer, shined his light on it, then on the rock, back and forth, like he couldn't make them match. We inched forward anyway, because turning around meant crawling backward through water and mud. And because Royce looked like he didn't want to admit fear to himself. That's when I saw the handholds. At first I thought they were natural. Erosion, water-worn pockets. But as my light moved along the wall, the pattern became obvious. Small indentations, evenly spaced, smooth, deliberate. The edges were rounded like they'd been used over and over, and they were too small. Not for a child's playful climbing either. They weren't random. They were placed at a height and spacing that suggested someone short, someone moving fast and confident, had used them as a route through the crawl. My mouth went dry. The sound of water dripping seemed farther away now, like the tunnel had dampened it. Royce shifted, and the water made a soft suction noise. He leaned closer to the wall, ran a gloved finger over one handhold, then pulled his hand back like the rock had burned him. "There shouldn't be anything past this," he whispered. We kept crawling, slower, because now every inch felt like trespassing. My light traced the handholds as they continued along the curve, disappearing into the narrowing darkness ahead. The tunnel pinched tighter, squeezing my shoulders. The water got shallower but colder, as if fed from somewhere deeper. Then the ceiling dropped again until my helmet scraped. The passage became a slot. Royce tried to push forward another foot, then stopped. His breathing was louder, forced. "We can't," he said, and it wasn't an argument, it was a fact. We started backing out, awkward and quiet. As we retreated, I kept my light on the handholds. They kept going. They went past where we'd reached, past the point where the tunnel disappeared into a tight, black seam. The handholds didn't stop at our limit. They continued into the darkness as if whoever made them had no trouble fitting through. When we finally reached a wider spot where we could turn around, Royce didn't look at me. He just started moving faster, like speed could erase what we'd seen. By the time we got back to the entrance, my hands were shaking and my knees were raw. Outside, the day had dimmed. Fog rolled in thicker, swallowing the trees and the road beyond. A fine rain had started, cold and persistent, tapping on leaves. Royce stripped his gloves off and stared down into the hole like he expected something to come out. I waited for him to say something that made it make sense. A reasonable explanation. Old mining marks, scout training, anything. Instead, he rubbed his face with both hands and said, almost to himself, "It was sealed." I stared at him. "What?" He looked up at me, and in his eyes, I saw something tired and ashamed, like he'd known all along and hoped the mountain would keep it secret. "This cave was sealed years ago," he said quietly. "After a rescue team went in, they found signs people were getting in. Repeated entry, but nobody ever recorded coming back out." The rain thickened, softening the world. The forest made no sound except dripping water. Even the birds had gone quiet. Royce swallowed. "I shouldn't have brought you." He said it like an apology, but it landed like a warning. And standing there in the wet fog, with mud on my clothes and cold in my bones, I realized something else. Something small and wrong that I couldn't name. My headlamp was still on, and the beam was pointing straight into the trees. Like I'd turned it there, without thinking. Like I'd been looking for something. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I showered until the water ran cold and my skin felt too tight. I scrubbed mud from under my nails and watched brown streaks spiral down the drain. I made coffee I didn't drink. I sat on the edge of my bed in my rented cabin outside Marion, listening to rain hit the metal roof in steady, patient taps. The cabin smelled like damp pine and old dust. The heater clicked on and off. Somewhere under the floor, something small moved. Mouse, maybe. And the sound made my shoulders tense. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that flooded tunnel. My ribs pressed into cold water. My light sliding over those handholds. Too smooth, too practiced. And in the middle of the night, I realized the detail that kept twisting the knife. The handholds weren't just carved. They were polished, not by water, by skin. Around 3 a.m., I got up and dug through my gear bag until I found the survey map Royce had handed me. It had gotten damp at the edges. The ink lines looked blurred in places, like the paper itself was trying to forget. I spread it on the small kitchen table and forced myself to trace the route with my finger. Entry passage, low crawl, pool, turnaround chamber that we never reached, except we turned where the map said we shouldn't have been able to. I heard Royce's whisper again. This isn't on the map. The next morning, my phone showed 2 missed calls from Royce. No voicemail. I called back, straight to voicemail. I texted, "You okay?" No reply. By midday, the rain had eased into a mist that clung to everything. The mountains looked closer than they should, their ridgelines blurred and soft. I drove towards Saltville again, telling myself I just wanted to return the map, get closure, put the whole thing behind me. On the way, I passed that same sagging cabin with the broken porch. This time I noticed something I'd missed before. Fresh muddy footprints on the porch boards. Small ones, barely visible in the gray light, but there. Too small to be mine. I kept driving. At the feed store lot, Royce's truck wasn't there. I called him again. Nothing. So I drove up the gravel road alone. The forest felt different without another person. The silence had weight. Fog sat thick in the hollows. And every now and then, I'd hear a distant crack. Branch shifting maybe. Or something, moving careful through wet brush. When I reached the cave entrance, my stomach dropped. The stone we'd moved the day before was set back in place, neat as if someone had carefully returned it. The bent metal ring was gone, completely removed, leaving a raw cavity in the cracked concrete. And there, half buried in wet leaves beside the hole, was a notebook. Royce's. I recognized it because he'd pulled it out twice underground to jot measurements. The cover was black plastic. The pages inside were swollen from damp. I picked it up with a gloved hand as if it might be contaminated. I flipped through. Most of it was normal. Numbers, angles, rough sketches of passages. Then the handwriting changed. Not the style, still Royce's, but the pressure. The ink dug into the paper, hard enough to tear it in places. We didn't go in today. We left today. Stop writing my time. I turned pages with a sick, careful slowness. Near the back was a rough sketch of the tunnel curve. The one not on the survey. On the wall of the sketch, he'd drawn little squares, in a line, the handholds. Under them, he'd written, "Not handholds, route." And beneath that, smaller, like he hadn't wanted to admit it even to paper. "They're not for going down." My throat tightened. I looked up, scanning the grey woods. The mist made everything close and far at the same time. Tree trunks emerged and vanished. Water dripped steadily from leaves. I could hear my own breathing loud inside my helmet. I forced myself to step closer to the hole. The smell rose up. Cold limestone, wet earth, and something else underneath it. Faint but unmistakable once my brain recognized it. Stale sweat. Human. I backed away instinctively. heart starting to thump in a slow, heavy rhythm. My radio, still clipped to my chest strap, even though I hadn't turned it on, made a soft click, then a faint hiss. At first, I thought it was the rain. Then I realized the sound had a pattern. A long inhale, a soft exhale. Breathing. I stared at the radio like it had betrayed me. The breath continued, slow and patient, as if whoever was on the other end wasn't in a hurry. My hands went numb. I pulled the radio off my strap and turned it on, thumb trembling, static. Then breathing again clearer, and under it, almost too quiet to catch, a scraping sound, like knuckles against rock. I wanted to throw the radio. Instead, I stood there, unable to move, listening to a sound that made my stomach hollow out. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Royce. "Don't come back. I already came back." I read it twice, trying to make it make sense. The forest stayed silent. The breathing on the radio didn't change. My light was pointed at the cave entrance without me realizing. The beam cut into the hole like a finger accusing it, and then so subtle I almost convinced myself it didn't happen. The breathing shifted. It synced to my movement. When my beam trembled, the inhale trembled with it. When I held the light steady, the breath steadied. When my hand twitched, the exhale shortened. My mind started reaching for explanations. Someone nearby with a scanner, messing with us, tracking our frequency. A person in the woods with a cheap baby monitor-like setup. A cruel prank. A landowner trying to scare people away. All of it was possible. None of it explained the smell. None of it explained the footprints on the porch. None of it explained the polished handholds that continued into a seam, too small for me. I backed toward my car, never taking the light off the hole, because I understood something in my bones then. The light wasn't for me. It was for whatever was paying attention to where I looked. When I reached the driver's seat, I slammed the door so hard it rattled the frame. I didn't start the car right away. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, wet gloves squeaking faintly, and stared through the windshield at fog and trees. My radio crackled once more. The breathing stopped. Not faded, stopped. And in the silence that followed, I heard something else. Not through electronics. Not imagined. A soft splash from inside the hole, like someone shifting in shallow water. Then nothing. I drove away so fast the tires spun in mud. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. Until I saw houses. Until the mountains loosened their grip. And the air smelled less like wet rot and more like gasoline and normal life. Royce never answered another call. A week later, I drove past his guiding shop. The sign was down. The windows were papered over from the inside, like it had been closed for a long time. Sometimes I catch myself losing chunks of time now. Not dramatic blackouts, just gaps. I'll look at the clock and realize an hour's gone, and I can't account for it. I'll find my headlamp on the kitchen counter when I don't remember taking it out. Once, I woke up with mud on my shoes. I keep telling myself it's stress, memory, guilt from the accident, the way trauma makes your brain skip like a scratched record. But on nights when the fog crawls low and the rain turns the world into a whisper, I'll stand at my window and sweep a flashlight beam across the yard without thinking. And I'll pause, holding the light steady on the tree line. Not because I see anything, because I'm waiting to hear if something, somewhere out there, matches my breath back.
If today's story touched a quiet corner of your heart, if for a moment you felt like someone was standing close to you, then remember you are not alone. To hear more terrifying whisper in the depth of the night, subscribe to our channel Night Mare Whisper, because every story is not just about fear, it leaves behind a feeling. Thanks for watching. And one more thing, we'll meet again tomorrow night when the darkness has grown a little deeper.